Hey guys, today we are going to start the do-it-yourself series for the rusty Barnacle. This is the rear hatch actuator. Very common that they go out, so we're going to rebuild this. I've gone ahead and taken it out of the car. We're going to pull it apart and repair it. So in this section we're just removing the screws out of the housing, so pretty straightforward. Not a whole lot to talk about, so I fast forwarded through this part. But bottom line is some are short and some are longer and have a thicker thread to them, and that corresponds with the longer machine thread go into this metal bracket. The shorter ones just thread into the plastic housing here. Not super difficult, don't need to keep track of the difference there because it's pretty obvious which ones go where. So I believe though, and I'll know this for a fact, I believe that the ones that go through the metal bracket here do require you to take them out because they hold these two pieces together. So with all the screws out, you can open this up and diagnose the failure point. Pretty straightforward. Looks like it has a screw type gear on the motor itself, which then turns a series of gears to open this. We'll pull this out. Shouldn't be anything too complicated on here, and see exactly what has stripped and failed on this. So unfortunately I was using a new camera setup because I didn't think the GoPro would capture this, so I was using a old DSLR that I had from years ago, and anyway, I tried to plug up an external microphone, didn't go real well, so ultimately what I'm doing here is explaining that the blue piece on the back side of that lower gear is broken, and that basically all it does is bind and provide friction that push these pins out. And so you can kind of see that it's broken. There's some better imagery here in a minute, but basically all it does is provide enough friction so that when it moves back and forth, there's these little pins, and it hits and pushes a pin out so that it binds against that bell housing. Kind of commented as well that looks a lot like an RC car bell housing if you've used a nitro powered RC car before. And so you can see the brake right there, and we're going to plasti weld that brake up and reinforce it, make it a little bit stronger. I had to do a little bit of filing on it as well. So here's where we're going to begin plasti welding. You can see the break in the part right there really well. I kind of paused it or slowed down the video speed so that you can see that break. Ultimately, basically just heat up the plastic, melt the parts, original parts back together. And then I actually added some filler rod on the outside here as well. You'll see that in the video. I wanted it to be strong. You'll also notice here in a minute that so add in some filler material, work that in as much as possible, trying to reinforce that area. You have to be a little bit careful. There's the that piece that clips the spring in has to clip around that, so you can't add too much at the top. At least I added it right there in that join where I'm talking about. It's kind of a weak point right there where it connects, and it breaks right there at that join where it goes from the circular motion to the vertical. And so so I was doing test fitment here. Used a file to file it down. You can also use your heat gun to modify it as well. Also note, if you don't have, I'm using an actual plastic welder. If you don't have a plastic welder, you can use a soldering iron. The people that originally did this, keep in mind this was probably 10 years ago from the articles that I saw and read. They tried to use epoxy and super glue, that type of stuff, and it didn't hold very well. I would have thought epoxy would be okay, but again, there's not a lot of surface area here, and it's relatively smooth plastic, so if you didn't bind it or clean it up, it'd probably be very difficult. So I'm just reinstalling the spring, and that actually is what causes the friction piece. When you put it on the back side of that gear, it attaches to the shaft, and that spring pushes the plastic down so that it binds, and then that allows for the little teeth up top with little metal rods and that top plate that you see right there to spring out, which is kind of cool. Getting it reinstalled was actually not too bad, but you gotta kind of press on it pretty hard to compress that spring. It's a good thing it didn't break, so I felt pretty good that if it didn't break on install, it was probably pretty strong. Again, the idea was to add more plastic, and there you can actually see really well the pins coming back. As I turn that gear, it forces those plastic rings out, which again, on the inside of that bell gear, there's little plastic grooves that they catch in and then lock up. And that's what doesn't happen is once that blue plastic piece breaks, those pins don't slide out, and then it doesn't bind up against that bell housing right there. The gear on the left on the countertop there is the bell housing I'm talking about binding. And so if it doesn't bind up, then it just spins freely. And so that's why when you try to use it, you'll just hear it spinning without it catching or anything like that. At this point, you reinstall your gears, pretty straightforward. I put it in the lower positioning and then just pop the gears in, pretty straightforward. And at that point, you're ready to reinstall the case. Pretty straightforward. You put the case on. I did line up the three bolts that go through the plastic housing into the metal bracket, leaving 2 of them loose until I got all 3 aligned and put in, and then simply reinstall the other, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 plastic thread screws that are shorter in the remaining holes, and you're ready to reinstall. Thanks for watching the video.
Hey guys, hope you enjoy watching the restoration of the rusty Barnacle, Integra Type R 98111. Please subscribe and keep looking for updates. Thanks.